Welcome back to another episode of the Adventures in Advising podcast. My name is Matt Markin, and I'm thrilled that you are here with us today as I get to interview the wonderful Dr. Shonda Goward. Dr. Goward is the Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Advising and Success at San José State University, where she leads 10 student success centers in closing equity gaps. Shonda, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're here. I know, we were previously at the Region 8, 9, 10 conference in Vegas and got to do a panel together with Cecilia and Terry, who were two guests on one of our previous episodes. And so I'm glad that you're here. We get to chat with you. And so we're going to go and get started with, tell us about yourself. What's been your background in higher ed and getting to San José State?
Sure. I got into higher ed like many other people. I was doing one thing and then that wasn't quite working, and I wanted a degree and didn't want to pay for it. And I kind of got into the field. So when I left college, I went to Bristol, Connecticut and was working at ESPN. And 9/11 happened, and I was at work that day, and we talked about football all day. Are they going to play NFL and college football the following weekend? And for me, I was like, is this what we're talking about when our country's on fire? And I did stay another 2 years because I really wanted to make a career in journalism work, and I just realized it wasn't for me. And my really strong formative experience in college was with my English professor, and I had always loved reading and writing, and I was like, I want to be like Dr. James Coleman. I want to be an English professor. So I went back to get a master's degree to do that. And fortunately, I went to a fantastic regional institution, Southern Connecticut State, and those faculty were like, baby, there's no jobs in English as for professors. Are you sure you want to go down this track when you're a first generation low income person? Is this the right thing? Because most of the department was contingent lecturers. They were like, don't be like us, do something else. But I was already in the program, and I got a position as a part-time academic advisor. And so I stayed in, and I was like, well, this is interesting. I'm helping students like myself who are trying to navigate this thing. And so that was enjoyable. Then I got a research fellowship. So I was like, okay, let me think about this. But I graduated and I got a job at a nonprofit. I was working for Girl Scouts, and I enjoyed that, but something kept calling me back to higher ed. So then I started, when I had moved to DC, I started my career in admissions and was on the road. And from there, I went from admissions to academic advising to some kind of quasi roles in between, leading some programs that were part student affairs, part advising, part admissions, and then a little bit in financial aid and back to advising. Actually, I ran a tutoring center in between there. So I've been all over, mostly handling in academic affairs.
Yeah, I I think a little bit more to the story too. It's like, your educational background, you're talking about places that you've attended, but if we're just talking about like degrees, you double majored in journalism and mass comm, in political science, and like you were talking about your MA in English, and then higher ed administration for your doctorate, and then all the different areas that you've worked in. So you kind of have a little bit of everything that I think in your role now can definitely help out with what you do. And I guess let's roll into that. You're at San José State University. Talk about your role. Like what's your day-to-day like, trying to lead all these success centers?
It's challenging. We're really, our provost and now our new president, we're looking at how San José State can be better. So when the advising reorganization started, our provost looked at some surveys, not from NACADA. We had a NACADA team that came out, and they said we had some areas of growth in academic advising. WASC, our accrediting body, said, y'all have some work to do here. The student survey said the same thing. So the provost said, okay, we need to act. We need to actually do something about that. So at the time, the advising centers reported in different areas. 2 of them were in student affairs, and then the other 8 that were in the colleges reported to the associate deans in the colleges. Under the reorganization, all 10 of those, so 8 colleges, exploratory students, and student athlete resource center report to me. And my role is, 1, to complete that reorganization, get our advising community thinking about advising as a profession, rather than transactional work. So getting to more into developmental advising, coordinating our resources so that our team has more time for that. So part of the reason why San Jose State wasn't doing it is just because everyone was doing their own thing. So no one had a real budget. So now under one umbrella, I have to figure out, how do I deploy these resources? And those resources could be dollars. It could also be people. Like, how do we make sure we hire enough folks to support our students in the right way? It means thinking about the student to advisor ratio. One of the goals of the reorg was to get first and second year advisor to student ratio down to 275 to 1. Now I'm working on getting the upper division ratio down to 500 to 1. We also have a split model here where lower division is done by professional staff, and upper division is done by faculty. So having those conversations with faculty be about what is developmental advising, how do we do that work, how do we use all the tools on campus. There's about 4 different systems we have to log into to support a student in an advising appointment. It's a lot. And sometimes for the faculty, it can get overwhelming, which I get, because it's like, what are all these systems they don't have to work in every day? And so right now, it's just kind of building what is undergraduate advising and success, because success is the retention part, and we haven't even gotten fully there yet. Right now, I'm still trying to build the team. We were impacted by the Great Resignation, and there are some folks who also had been at the institution for a very long time, and this was the direction we were going, and this is not necessarily what they wanted to do. So we've lost a lot of folks. So I'm filling in those gaps now and building out what is our future going to look like. So my day-to-day is a lot of meetings. I do most of my work at night after the day is done, because I sit on committees for enrollment. I sit on committees with the associate deans and thinking about how can advising support the work that's going on in the colleges. I sit on the academic leadership team with the provost. So that's the vice provost and the deans. I'm in meetings with our student affairs colleagues, whether it's about tutoring or about the cultural centers. I'm in meetings with my own team. So I'm in meetings all the time about something or other. And then like the nitty gritty of it gets done in the night. For now, long term, I have to build some kind of well-being and success, sustainability for myself. But this is where we are with a massive reorganization. I think it's going to take another year for us to stabilize.
Yeah, and I think maybe people listening may feel like, wow, I have an understanding, but not really, because to be able to, for someone to really have a full understanding of like what goes into it. For me as an advisor, I don't see any of that. I just hear it kind of trickle down. So, I know there's got to be so much more that goes onto it. And one of the other things that you're responsible for, aside from having to meet and put all this together, you're leading these success centers, making sure that, they're following what the goals, the mission is, but you're also in charge of closing equity gaps. So with everything that you're doing, and I'm sure there's a lot of connections too with all of this, how are you leading those efforts?
So it's really thinking about our work systematically rather than individually. So I think historically advising was we want to do the one-on-one thing. If you've ever seen Animaniacs, the cartoon, where the Animaniacs is like, I want to hug him and squeeze him and love him and call him George. We want to hug our students through the challenges that they experience as they graduate. The problem is, on a campus with 30,000 undergraduates, you cannot one-on-one everybody to student success. You have to think, how do we redesign things so that our work reaches more people? So 2 big things I've taken on this year. One is redesigning Cal Promise with the deans, the associate deans. So Cal Promise, as you probably know, is a program that is encouraging students to complete 15 units every semester so that they can graduate on time. And it's for racially minoritized students and or Pell eligible students. This is a state program. We are required to do it. What we're doing in the fall is some of our college, we're piloting a piece to this where we're not just talking one-on-one with students about 15 units. We are piloting a space where students who opt into Cal Promise will be offered classes that they're block enrolled into with faculty who have volunteered to do this and really want to work with first year students. We know from the literature that first year students need that connection with faculty to learn how to navigate the institution, and for the institution to say, we're reaching out to you, and for the faculty to get to hear from the students, and from the students to learn how to interact with the faculty. So in about half of our colleges, they'll have this experience where they're in a course with faculty who have agreed to be trained in how to best support first year students of color and who are and or low income. They'll have the students will have not only connections with the faculty in the classroom, but at least two outside connections as well, to kind of be a little bit more informal. Where I'm working currently with student affairs to also have a specific learning community for those students so that they get the support they need. And then in their second semester, they will be offered the opportunity to take a course called UNVS 101, which is offered with San Jose State and Braven, a nonprofit. And that course is really a career accelerator and helps students think about what is it that they want to do and how does that translate out in the world once they graduate and they come out with this amazing portfolio. So we really want to do more at a large scale to be systematic and hands-on with our incoming first year students. The other thing on the other side is I'm working on redesigning academic probation. So right now, every college does something differently, and we're trying to standardize. And the program I'm looking at creating started at San Diego State in 2003 and was replicated at UNC Chapel Hill, my alma mater. So I got to work on that program and I saw how it worked, and I've been looking at the literature on it. We've tweaked it a bit for our students, and we're using a community cultural wealth framework. So this morning I'm finishing up a federal grant request to help us fund this program, which will have a Canvas course where students will learn skills that can help them be successful in the university, and how their community cultural wealth will help them succeed at the university. It's not something they have to leave behind. It's something we want at San Jose State. These students will also be required to meet with their academic advisor at least twice in the semester. And then the most important intervention is they'll be meeting biweekly with clinicians in training. These are students in the Masters of Social Work and Psychology program that are going to be overseen by someone with a license. And in those meetings, they will receive coaching to think about, again, what is the right degree program for you? What are your goals? What are your interests? And how can you achieve them through the curriculum here at San Jose State? What can we do as an institution to support you, to get you back on track? Those students who successfully return to academic good standing will also be encouraged to take the UNVS 101 Braven course. If they don't and they reach PRB2, which is our second level of academic probation, where you have improved your GPA, but you're not really back to good standing, those students will also be potentially offered the chance to take the course. So we're really thinking about equity in a really large scale and putting dollars behind it. Well, applying for dollars to put behind it where we can. So that's what we are responsible for, contributing to closing equity gaps by thinking differently about how we serve students en masse.
Oh yeah, and with the career accelerator course, does that also count towards like baccalaureate level credit or towards
It does.
graduation?
It is a credit-bearing course. It's an elective, but it is a credit-bearing course.
Nice. And with the faculty that have kind of signed on to participate in this, has the response been pretty positive for faculty saying, "Hey, I want to help out with this"?
It is, especially for certain general education courses. That's what we're working with. And so once we were able to, work with the associate deans to think about, well, who might best serve in this role, and they reached out to so it's a partnership with the colleges. The associate deans reached out to the faculty in their colleges, thought about the classes that would work, because they need to be general education classes that would fit in any degree plan. We're an impacted campus, meaning that some majors are very strict and they have a very defined roadmap. So these courses need to be able to fit in multiple roadmaps. And it needed to be faculty who had the time and dedication to this kind of work with students. And we were very fortunate to find those faculty. And like I said, we'll pilot it in the fall. And if it works, then we're going to hope to expand it to the rest of our colleges.
Oh, wonderful. And I guess with like the kind of like the block scheduling with some of these GE classes. So the block scheduling is more so like the GE classes, and then depending on the student's major, they'll also graduation wise, if they're looking for a timely graduation, they'll also throw in some of their like intro major courses as well.
Exactly. So
Okay.
the block only has 1 or 2 classes, and then they'll
Mhm.
choose the rest of their remaining courses. This is opt-in, so students know. In fact, we're getting ready to send the letter out, letting students know that they're eligible for this, what it is, when the classes are offered, and that they want to, and let them know they want to sign up. This is so Cal Promises post is for transfer students and first year students, but we're piloting with first year students because transfers have a much narrow window to graduate on time. They've got those 2 years they've really got to focus. So if this goes well, then we want to figure out how to adapt to transfer students because it'd be a bit different. The other thing that Cal Promise students receive on our campus is early registration. So they register a few hours before the rest of the people in their cohort. So they have to remain on track to graduate in order to receive that benefit. So it's
Mhm.
kind of just wrapping students around it and with support as they walk in the door.
Wow, that's on the side. I think maybe in a year's time, we'll have you back on the podcast and say, "Hey, what's happened
How'd it
since then
go?
with that pilot?" And
Yeah.
yeah, what can you share? Because I'm sure a lot of institutions that might be looking at ways how do we close these equity gaps might be like, "This seems like a wonderful way." Seems like a lot of stress putting this together for a pilot, but it almost seems like this will definitely be well worth it. Once
We're
you get through,
hopeful.
yeah.
It was figuring out how do we use something that already we wanted to close equity gaps, but we didn't want to target students of color or low income students and be like, hey, you, something's wrong
Mhm.
with you. Cal Promise was already there and it already is opt in and it's already set up for these students who self identify. So I had to think about how do we use what we already have to get to the
Mhm.
aims and redesign it for the aims that we want to achieve.
Yeah. Now, I guess from like an advisor perspective, like, when we hear closing equity gaps, sometimes, depending on the institution, it might be thrown out as like the buzzword of the year or the month to use. But like from an advisor who's, meeting with students and is thinking, well, do I need to change up how I'm doing something, or I'm meeting with the student, or I guess even just professional development training? Any advice for an advisor?
I think one thing that could help advisors is going, when many of us have degrees in higher ed administration, and then we stop reading in the literature the minute we graduate, and
Hmm.
making sure we stay up to date. This is where the faculty and the staff have to collaborate because they're doing all this research work. And then sometimes we build our praxis on how we feel rather than the data. And so learning to read your institutional data, learning to read, okay, what is out there as far as my particular population of students and how I can best support them. Even if you don't have a ton of, I haven't always had a ton of professional development dollars. You can still join in on an Akata webinar or connect with someone else at another institution. I think sometimes in California, because we're so huge, we're like we're the biggest, and they're like, but we can be the best, and we should strive for that. And sometimes that means going outside of the state, and sometimes that means listening to other folks who have done some things, and then think about, well, how does that work at my institution? We don't want to just graft something that's worked here over here, but there are things we can take from that based on the principles and the framework that we're using. So our advising framework, we're basing it on some work that was done in the community colleges. They're way ahead of us on equity. Might as well go learn from somebody who's doing it well. And the framework we're using has been empirically tested at community colleges and now some 4 years. So thinking about that. Then it's also thinking about, okay, what are the supports that are needed in on my campus or in my college, however your advising model is set up. Sometimes one-on-one advising is absolutely what is needed. Sometimes we can do things in groups. Like registration is massive and it's always stressful for advisors. Doing some group advising about the classes to get the transactional work out of the way allows us to then spend some time doing one-on-one work in a way that's a bit more meaningful and helps students make meaning between their careers, who they are, who they want to, I mean, their curriculum, who they are, who they want to be, and eventually their careers. You're right. We know that learning and development isn't just about a career, but that's a huge part of it. So thinking about, well, if I can do the transactional part easily. What then I do I want those advising appointments to look like? What do we want to achieve in those appointments? Yes, some of it is about getting resources out there for students who are struggling, but also don't forget those students in the middle. I think we often forget the students who have a 2.0 to a 3.0, and it's like, okay, they're fine, they're not struggling per se, but that doesn't mean that they don't still need support. And then our high flyer students, let's make sure we're abreast of things for them. What does the undergraduate research look like on your campus, and how do they get involved? Do you have people who want to apply for Fulbright fellowships? And are we reaching out to those students with those strong GPAs to make sure they're not missing opportunities, and that they're okay? The work of Bridget Turner Kelly has always stood with me. I went to ASH, the Association for the Study of Higher Education, a while ago, and I heard this presentation of her work. And I'll never forget her talking about people ignoring Black women, because Black women, she said that the students felt like they had the grades, but they didn't have well being.
Mm.
So just because a student is performing well doesn't mean that they're okay. And we're seeing that, unfortunately, in the rate of students taking their own lives on campus. I've seen it in my own time with students with 3.73 GPAs who have harmed themselves. And everybody's going, well, they had everything going for them. Clearly, they didn't, and we missed it. And advising is a place where we can catch that. That doesn't mean that we have to address it. We have our very capable colleagues in counseling and psychological services, but not assuming that everyone's okay is a huge thing as well.
Yeah. And a lot of that too in those advising appointments is how much the information student wants to give, but also what kind of questions the advisor asks, and how much they dig deep into that. And I think that's
Yeah.
also kind of a challenge, I think, with some advisors is, do I feel comfortable doing that? Or, how do I react? But I think it's also knowing about, what resources are available that they could encourage a student to maybe use, but also just kind of having that friendly environment as well, so student feels comfortable to be able to talk to an advisor.
Absolutely. And building rapport over time.
Mhm.
We don't have to wait to registration to reach out to students, or wait till we get an early alert or notification, as we changed our term from alert to notification. We don't have to wait till we get one. If we think of a student, I saw this opportunity and thought you might be interested in this, or it could be multiple students. I saw this opportunity and thought it might be good for all students in kinesiology, and just sending it out, it shows the students that we're paying attention.
Yeah. Now, the caseload model that you were referring to earlier, is that something too that starts in fall, or is that something that is already going on right now?
So that we started the SAS model, which is the lower division at 275 to 1, and we're hoping to get to the upper division 500 to 1 caseload. It's a challenge with hiring. San Jose State is a very expensive area, and our salaries have not kept up to the area. And that's just a result of the CSU, this California State University system as a whole. And we just happen to be caught in a really, really expensive space. So it's hiring folks that can fill those roles. And when you have a lot of change, people are like, what is going on over there? Do I want to work there? Right. And so part of it for me is I've been at a lot of conferences recruiting, just like, this is who I am as a leader. This is the kind of work that we're doing moving forward. If that's what you're interested in, I would love to, have you apply to a role on my team.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of being like in this advisor administrator role, being in this leader role, I'm sure you've have lessons that you've learned about yourself and the staff that you've supervised. So I guess over these years, what have you learned about yourself as an administrator?
Ooh, it changes. Being home in California has been really, really interesting because it's a very different world than the East Coast.
Mhm.
In some ways, I think it's because, again, we're so big and we're out here on a whole different time zone that we don't interact with other folks that often. So I think that the East Coast is ahead of us in a lot of respects. And so for me, starting my career East and coming West, I've had to slow down, and I'm still working to slow down and bring my team with me on the things that we're trying to do, knowing that folks are already struggling with capacity coming out of COVID. Like, higher ed never stopped, and it's one
Yeah.
thing that frustrates me as a whole is that we really didn't have a chance to go, this was a really challenging thing that we all went through, And can we have a breather and get before we get back to it? And that doesn't happen in advising, especially because advising is on for every aspect of the work. Like, we start with helping admissions with yield all
Mhm.
the way through orientation. There's no real break in there. So I've had to think about, how do I support the team in taking breaks? I
Mhm.
try to take my vacation days so they see that I am busy all the time, but I still get in some days away from the office, empowering my team to step up as leaders. When I'm out of the office, you're the administrator in charge. As long as it's not the budget, make a decision. Don't spend any money we don't have. But other than that, make a decision. Thinking about our systems and structure. So this year, I had to talk with the new student and family programming team. I was like, our advisors cannot crush. We can't have orientation all the way up to the time school starts, because
Mhm.
there's no time for advisors to breathe before they have to get into the academic year and then registration. So for me, I had to remind myself, as I'm thinking about systems for closing equity gaps, I need to think about systems for supporting my team, especially when we're not a place where we can provide raises. So now we have a 3-week gap between the end of orientation and the start of classes. That's great
Mhm.
for my team. They get to breathe, take some vacation. They can also help solve student problems for students who register for the wrong classes, things like that. It's building in some, I've had to think about systems and building in some ladders. Like, folks are leaving the institution because they don't see where they can grow. So we've got some assistant director positions that are coming that will do some work that we need. And it's also a career ladder for our team. It's really thinking about, I've had to think about, what does it mean to be at a regional public institution. I started my full-time advising career, or my full-time admissions career, at a private institution, and I worked at private schools for a while, and it's a very different thing. Especially private tuition dependent institutions, because they have to move fast, because if they don't, they lose revenue.
Mhm.
We're different, and working through those systems and those relationships, I'm very much an analytical thinker. Thinking through the relationships is a challenge for me, and I've had to work on that in the 19 months I've been here. And you can have all the numbers you want, that doesn't mean folks feel like you're hearing what they're saying. It's a continual thing for me to develop and work on as a leader.
Yeah, and you're mentioning, about uh, staff maybe leaving. You're talking about career ladders, talking about budget. Um, so I guess, and this was a question we asked during the panel at the Region 8, 9, 10 conference in Vegas, and back in March, early March. And that was kind of, when do you take a risk on employees, especially if you have some employees that might be looking to move up and maybe there is a possible position. But then it's like, but then I only have so much budget. So could I hire more staff? So in a position like yours, where you're having to deal with so many different things, and also retention of employees, how do you navigate that?
It's a real challenge, because even though I'm an AVP and I'm a senior most person in advising, I'm a middle leader when it comes to the campus.
Mhm.
So when I go to academic leadership team, I'm very junior, right? Everyone in that room is a vice provost or a dean, which is a level above me. And so the budget I have is the budget I have. And
Mhm.
so right now I'm navigating this very thing right now, where I know that folks need more money to live in the area that we live in, and we haven't been able to provide professional development dollars in a
Mhm.
year, because I need to solidify the budget across all 10 centers.
Mhm.
We are working to develop some in-house advising, professional development. We're working to redesign our onboarding and our training, so will have two different tracks: one for brand new advisors who've been with us less than 2 years,
Mhm.
and one for folks who've been there over 2 years, and they've got some skills and now they want to learn new things. Like, one thing people really are asking me about is, well, how do I learn how to do assessment? Great, we're
Mhm.
going to work on those skills. So how do we do things in house where I can spend some money? I can hire someone to come work with us and spend $5,000, where rather than trying to send one person to a conference, and that's going to cost $2,000, right? If I can just bring somebody to us. So just thinking in those terms, but it's a constant struggle just because higher ed is is one of those labors that just doesn't pay well, and retaining folks when folks are making other decisions. I had a staff member leave our job to go become an admin at a tech company and doubled their salary. And I can't compete against that. Um, so it's really working with the folks who want to do this work in this field and figuring out how to support them, whatever that may be. So in some departments, I've got folks who are doing where we're really down and short staffed. I am giving them um, one-time bonuses to cover the extra work that they're doing.
Mm.
Um, and some folks where I don't have directors, I have put people in as advising leads so they get some time to learn what it's like to be a director. So they'll have that on their resumes and they get a sense of, do I really want to do this? So trying to think of as many opportunities to develop folks in-house as we can is what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, and it's like you have to work with what you have budget wise. I know I've had some colleagues that have left and they went to the private sector and they're like, "Hey, Matt, I'm making so much more," and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, would I make that jump? I don't know."
Yeah.
And then there's also even like the ones that want to just work remote. And I've had a colleague and she left a year ago and is loving it at the other institution that she's at because she can be remote as an advisor 5 days out of the week.
Yeah, and I don't have that capacity,
Yeah.
right? I hate having to say all the time, "No, I can't do that. No, I can't do that." And trying to highlight for people, what is it that we can offer? We serve
Mm,
a unique population of students that really needs folks, all that care and the concern that we have. I remind people that we are in the state of California and we still have a pension, not a 401k,
yeah.
but a pension. Now, some of our staff who are not nearing retirement age, that doesn't resonate for them. But for those folks who are thinking about the long term,
Mhm.
that lifetime healthcare you can get in the CSU after working with us for a certain number of years, the fact that we have a guaranteed pension, for some folks that does mean something, and so they're like, okay, there's a trade-off here. And they also know that I back them on wanting more money. If I the minute I get more money, the minute I'm happy to give it to them. And so and I think our campus is that way as well. If the CSU or the governor says, okay, here's more money for higher education and salaries, we would give it to them as soon as we can. So I think, helping folks understand that I'm with you. I dig
Mhm.
it. I know that if we could provide more, if I could provide more, I absolutely would.
Oh yeah, and yeah, I agree with you about the CSU and the pension. I mean, I've 19 years will be this August that I've been staff, and so I'm like, oh gosh, I'm at that point where I feel like if I were to leave, I'm like, I want to start all over again,
No.
So I, I think I'm gonna stay.
Yeah,
And
my
if
mom
anything,
said
yeah.
the
Oh, go
state of
ahead.
California is gonna have to kick me out.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny, like, a few years ago, I would never thought I'd be thinking about retirement, and now I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I am getting older, and I'm still at an age where I can actually technically, when I start, I can actually retire at 55 if I want it. It's probably not gonna happen, but at
Yeah,
least in my mind, it makes me happy that I have that as an option.
as an option. Yeah.
Now you kind of, I think this kind of connects to things you've already said, but one of the other questions that we had asked during the panel was about like preparing those future leaders, but also succession planning, especially when we do retire or we move on, maybe to another position, another institution. So for you, is that something you're also thinking about is, in 10, 15 years or however long, uh, bringing in or molding new leaders, is that something that you're considering?
Yes, and it's something I think about with this actually started early in my career. When I was an advisor myself, I was in an advising unit, and this was at a time when people were starting families. And
Mhm.
I promise you, every semester, it was one person would either they were pregnant or their spouse was pregnant. They would go out on a family leave and never come back.
Mhm.
And this happened for like 5 people. And it got to a point where we were like, we have to create some redundancies here, because what's happening is those students, we had a one-to-one advisor where we had a caseload where students had one advisor. And then when that person would go out on leave, actually, it wasn't even just family leave. There were other leaves, medical, things like that. That those students then had to be redirected to another person that they don't know, have to tell their story all over again to. And then if that person never came back, now what do we do with that group of students? They're being placed with a brand new advisor that doesn't has to be trained, and it was just messy. And so one of the things we did at GW was I suggested a pod system where every student has not one but two advisors, and they know both of them, and they can see either one. So that way, if Bobby Sue is on vacation, then they can see Jamal, and so that everybody has their caseload. So now we're trying to build some redundancies into the system that also gives the advisors a break, right? They don't feel guilty about taking some days off. So that's number one. Building in, we don't have steps in the CSU system. So adding the assistant director role helps provide some of that unofficial step that also gives us the much needed leadership we need, because in my unit, managing directors support two different centers. So now we have someone who's getting some experience in their leadership development, but not responsible for the whole thing. Working with the management team and pulling them in on projects. So this grant I'm applying for with the federal government, one of the managing directors is involved in that application. So he can see what this looks like. And so that when it's his turn and he's ready to think about these large initiatives, he has experience in doing it. And it's like, for me, this is all new for me. I've had to kind of learn the hard way. And so I don't want other folks behind me to have to learn the hard way. Get in on it now. Working with my team to really understand how to use data and the literature. I think we've hammered the data term home in higher ed, but it's not just your own campus data. It's your system data, it's your state data, it's your national data, and then the research evidence. Are we, again, going back to reading articles and keeping up with what's the best interventions and support for whatever populations of students we're working with, and then learning how to apply that evidence to the work you do on campus. So outside of my day job, I am also soon to be the incoming advisory board chair for the CSU Student Success Network. Right now, I'm the convenings director, and we just had a convening at the end of the fall about how do you do research to practice, and what are the steps you have to think about, not just in gathering the evidence, but then how do you build support for this idea that you have? How do you budget support, staff power support? And that went really well. And we're going to do some more work. Actually, we're going to have another event in September for the CSU about, now that you've kind of got some support, how do you navigate the politics in that? Because when anytime you're doing change, people hear that I'm doing something bad. It doesn't mean that we're doing something bad. It just means let's think about this differently because something has changed, whether that we have more resources or the student population has changed. And how do you navigate that? So we're doing that right now in the CSU Student Success Network in September.
Wow. And in addition to that, you also have a connection to like the public library.
Yes.
Because most recently you also got the Hayward Hearts Volunteer Award and recognition for your service, right?
It's one of the most endearing. So I'm from Hayward, California. I live in my hometown, and I do volunteer both on the Friends of the Hayward Public Library, and I'm a library commissioner. And so the library staff nominated me for their Heart of Hayward Award for this year. And it just, I can't think of anything else. That just makes me smile because I'm so grateful. The library gave me so much as a young person. It's the one place in the public where you can go with no money. That and the post office, but there's not a lot you can do in the post office. So the library, right? I learned to read because I had such fantastic librarians. We had so many programs, and our public library in Hayward does so much. There's a veterans mobile that will help people who are veterans figure out how to turn their resumes into something for private life. We've got something for unhoused people where there's a shower that comes a few days a week. There's a lawyer in the library. There's the tutoring and literacy program. And so it's just one of my big joys is working with the library on. So yeah, that's I do for me to maintain my own sanity and not make everything work.
Because that was gonna be my last question is like, what do you do for your wellness? We're talking about, a lot of the challenges that are happening at institutions with advisors. And then we're hearing all these responsibilities that you have just within your own position, but then all the extra committees that you're on and that you're doing that aren't part of your actual job you get paid for. But this also kind of explains like in your email signature about like when you answer emails.
Yes, my email signature says sometimes I'll write emails in the middle of the night. I don't expect replies until business hours, but if I don't email in the middle of the night, you might not get a response from me. And I have so many that trying to schedule send. What's going to happen is you're just going to get a bunch the next morning at 8 a.m. anyway. So it doesn't help. I will tell you, I'm completely out of balance right now. I will be completely upfront and honest about that. Taking on this role while we're still in the midst of the Panasonic, and trying to lead this team and pull it together and all the things I want to do. Plus, I've got the library commission. I'm still active in my sorority, so I'm on the social action committee. I'm an active junior leaguer. I've been on the budget and finance committee. Now, I will say one of the reasons why I worked on the budget and finance committee with Junior League is because I wanted to learn a new skill and I wanted to learn about fundraising. So sometimes I use my outside things to learn a new skill that's going to help me in my role at work.
Yeah.
But as far as fun, I do try. I have friends. In higher ed, you often move around, so you have friends all over the country because you move so much or they've moved, and so I'm a points queen. And so I try to maximize my credit cards for points so I can travel for free. So I went to Washington, D.C. to check on a friend of mine, and that whole trip for a week was free. I did not pay for my hotel room or my flight. So just trying to travel some and not pay for it. That's my little hobby.
Oh, that sounds like that's a cool plan. I need to start traveling more. I'm gonna contact you for some tips on that.
I'm happy to
Yeah.
share.
But to listeners, one thing that has been mentioned among everything else that Shonda does is Shonda's also co-chairing the 2024 Region 9 and CalCAN conference with Gabby Nuno from Stanislaus. So something extra on your plate there.
We're excited though. We're excited to have everybody in San Jose. Gabby is phenomenal human. I enjoy working with her and her ideas from Stan State. So we're excited. And this is not just yes, I am the official co-chair, but my whole campus is going to be involved in this. They already know, and it also gives them a chance to go to a conference because I can't normally afford one. So they get to come.
Hey, this is the
Backyard.
opportunity.
Exactly.
But this is a lot of great information that you've shared. So Shonda, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Matt, for making such a wonderful space. I appreciate being here.